Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts around fundraising. For a long time, institutions in culture and creative industries, practices in culture and creative industries have had the challenge of sophisticating themselves or sophisticating their processes so they can better access the few available grant opportunities in our ecosystem. So I think this is a remarkable opportunity to help improve or share perspectives on how to better prepare for fundraising. I think the first and most important principle is to know that fundraising or the fundraising process is persuasion. It really is about a persuasive process of where you identify possible partners and go into an open-minded co-creation process that allows you to express yourself, express your best capabilities and your intentions, and to allow them to build a partnership and to support a project or a program that you're creating. For most of our practitioners and entrepreneurs in this space, it's important for them to think about it as a long-term process that begins at ideation, that proceeds into relationship building, and that relationship building creates an opportunity for sharing the concepts. And a lot of us think when we've shared the concepts, that's when the fundraising begins. But I think it's in the sharing of the values, the sharing of the worldviews. And then thereafter, we leverage our tools and our capabilities to be able to deliver a project. The first time you might have a good chance to get it, but you probably won't get it in the first time. So how do we prepare ourselves for success? First is to look at our organizations, the container through which these visions that will be delivered. Is it properly registered? Does it have the kind of team, whether on permanent or any other association or even community, to deliver the kind of promises that we set out to? And if we do not have that team, do we have an imagination of how to build that team as part of the project? Because those are the people who will make a case for any ideas. And so there has to be a lead, there has to be someone with capacity for finance, there has to be someone with a bit of experience in project management, because those are some of the core skills that are required. After that, you have to have the extrovert in that team, or the salesperson in that team who goes out there and networks and brings relationships closer to the idea. After that is the work to build this concept, because not every idea is a concept. Most ideas sound great, but when you test them, you realize either someone else has done it, or you do not have the capacity to do it. Or you might have a capacity, but you do not have the time to do it, or you don't have all the necessary pieces to do it. And so the development of the concept is useful because it allows the people sponsoring or proposing it to be able to organize all the moving parts in a coherent way, so that you can present that in a way of a fundraising campaign. Because a lot of us assume that the narrative application has the same implication, or at least more implication, than the budget. But we have to imagine that at least the budget will be analyzed as much as the narrative application. And so spend as much time in looking at the matrices, the costings, the risks, the insurances, the proportions of compensation between one role and the other, the allocation of hours, the kind of tranching of the money. Do you want all of it together? Do you want it in different segments? And why do you want them in that segment? Which currency do you want it in? Because some people write it in local currency. Sometimes the grant is in foreign currency. So you should align yourself to the currency of the donor, because they will be accounting for that money in that currency. And you should also account for the fluctuations of changing those currencies. And so there are many considerations in the budget. And what is important is that as much time as you can spend on the budget demonstrates your level of competence. Hopefully, they put you in the shortlist. after they put you on a short list, you are most likely going to get a contract. But if you got on the short list and you don't get a contract, you must ask them why you failed, so that in the next round you can improve on those things. But let's say you are on the short list and now you've been offered a contract. A lot of people forget that the contract negotiation process is as critical as concept development, because in the contract there are the terms and conditions, there are the limitations, the risks. And so when you sign a contract without thinking about it, some people come and say this was a bad partner, this was a bad arrangement, this money was not done well. So look at the contract, not just how much you're getting and the period of delivery, but you must look at when is the money coming in. What do you do before the money comes in? Are you expected to have started implementation? How do you pay for that? How do you hire? Because if the money is delayed, you have to hire in advance. How do you? Because the contract details, especially on the movement of money, drawdown and so on and so forth, affects your cash flow. And if it affects your cash flow, it affects your delivery. Fundraising means that while in the project, you learn how to measure your impact, you keep your records right, you keep your financial records properly, you audit, because all that information will be used against you if you fail, because someone else will always ask for your reference from your previous funder. And if your previous funder can't vouch for you, then you'll definitely be ineligible for future funding from both that funder and other people. My aim has always been, for every contract that you have with one organization, I always expect to have 2 more. May not be the same, may not have the same value, but I expect 2 more, because you put in so much work, deliberate work, in building and maintaining a relationship. You can feed from that relationship at least twice more. To answer that question, you have to think about 2 lines or 2 vernaculars of financing. There's a grant-based financing and there's enterprise-based financing, and those are both institutions in our space. For the grant-based institutions, I think there are also 2 subsets. Let's start with them. There's the solo practitioners and there's institutional or community organizations. I think the solo practitioners, these are creators, sculptors, community workers, artists, makers of things who are individuals. I think the ecosystem has residencies, has exchange programs, has research grants, has community placements grants. And I think if you're a solo practitioner, these are some of the things to start to think about. Look at our cultural organizations, such as the bilateral ones like GOTE, like British Council. They always are offering and announcing these processes. And for the community organizations, I think it is important to think about the ecosystem, and the ecosystem of funders here are always related in one way or another to either ministries and governments, and so there's always like culture funds from government departments, from UNESCO, from UN institutions, from research institutions that are around culture and cultural practice. I would say the museum network, the UNESCO network, and some university history and heritage departments are a good place to begin. Where the rest of the money found? I think the enterprise route is a wider route, because people who produce music, who produce handmade goods, crafts, and any other traditional or historical design and prints, they can have a path to market, whether it's through community organizations, whether fair trade organizations, and so on and so forth. It's important for them to create a platform through which they can get incomes, and they can distribute those incomes back to the producer communities, but also use some of that to plow back in future production. Particularly in culture and heritage, there are few institutions that we can consider old, large. A lot of our practitioners are in the category that you've mentioned. So the question of demonstrating impact is critical. So every idea has to have an inbuilt mechanism to report against the impact that they are looking to have in their community. So the question of impact is implicit, and so the question that I think that they are asking is how can they demonstrate previous experience without having sufficient. So the easiest way to approach this is to always propose projects as pilots. So then within the structure of a pilot, you can have research facilities that allows for prototyping, that allows for seed granting, so that once you prove a concept, then you can scale it. And that is the surest way for institutions to get resources to start on smaller projects. And only when they get their theory of change right, when they get their teams right, or the components in which that they feel that they have a deficiency within the prototype or within the pilot, then now they can write a grant again to scale that project. The question of alignment is an age-old question, and I think I often have to deal with these questions in numerous ways. There's the structural alignment, and then there's also the practice alignment. On the structural side, you have to think about the criteria that the institution that or the facility you're applying to, whether you fit those criteria. And they range from gender, amount of money, the type of institution that you're asking for, the type of grants that you're asking for, the geography, the location, the level of involvement of public institutions, or lack thereof, your level of education, and so on and so forth. So as far as those are concerned, the structural ones, it is the responsibility of the applicant to find out as much as possible so that they can determine whether they're aligned. Often, all these grants have an email address or a telephone or an opportunity for a question and answer before the closing of the application window. So I encourage every applicant to use that as many times as possible, because that is a facility usually extended to allow you to get as much interaction as possible before you decide whether that is applicable or not. The second kind of alignment is the more salient alignment that a lot of artists and practitioners look for, and this is the ethical one. Does the institution I'm applying for have the same values that I do? How much creative control do I get in this project, or do I not? And all of those are material but subjective ethical questions that the applicant must have clarity about their own practice, so that they can at least align themselves to the institutions that share the same value that they do. And so that is internal work that the applicant has to do, but on the same platform that I shared earlier, that they can ask those questions, the qualitative questions, before they make an application. It depends on the level of maturity, the size of the grant, and the institutional orientation of these funders. And so I'll give a couple of examples, or rather categories. Arts funds, generally, like artistic funds, prize artistic merit, heritage and heritage practice fund prioritize a demonstration of a community or a heritage practice. And so outside of those, every other fund has a very strict criteria. And so if you find a fund and you look at their 4 or 5 criteria areas and you only match 3, 3 is a good number to take a risk. But if you find that they have 6 criteria and you only meet 2, just know that you might not fare well with the rest of the application. But what are the generic things that funders look for? Generic things is that the applicants have a good background that can demonstrate their capability, their awareness, their competence for the work that they want to do. The other group of details that is critical from a funder is the organizational credibility. Organizational credibility is demonstrated with a governance structure, compliance to statutory requirements, compliance to industry, because the specific industry has its own standards, and most importantly, procurement, financial, and legal considerations. The considerations in an application is not just that you've completed the information, but you've also submitted them. So what is a complete application? A complete application is the narrative application. Sometimes it's in a form. Sometimes you have to upload the information or enter it into an online form. The financial budgets and so on and so forth, and they're usually explained. There's also the registration information, sometimes the CVs of the core people, sometimes the policies such as procurement, financial, and so on and so forth. And you have to submit all of them in the required format, because that is considered a complete application. You cannot fill some and leave some and consider your application complete.